Well, welcome everyone. Happy holidays. We are very excited to have you with us tonight. This webinar series is from Nemours, and it is entitled really Help for the Holidays, Tips for Managing Family Health and Wellness Through the Busy Holiday Season. My name is Michael Rouse. I'm really excited to be facilitating tonight's event. We have a wonderful guest speaker, an expert from Nemours, who we've gotten to know very well, Dr. Zachary Radcliff. Just a couple things about tonight's session. You can see us, but we cannot see you. So you're on mute, but please use the Q&A box to ask any questions that you may have tonight, and we will be happy to answer them. Share your questions as they arise. We will do our best to address as many questions as time allows tonight. Tonight's presentation will be about 60 minutes. And this presentation is being recorded and will be emailed to all of our families after tonight's event. I want to talk to you about our amazing subject matter expert, Dr. Zachary Radcliff, who has his PhD in pediatric clinical psychology. He works in the integrated primary care at Nemours Children's Health in Delaware. He's very passionate about equitable access to mental health services, telehealth, and is supporting healthcare workers across all disciplines. Other areas of focus, Dr. Radcliff, include LGBTQ, eating disorders, chronic medical conditions, and autism. Of note, he has been the head counselor of a camp and a camp psychologist for various summer camps over the past 20 years. He's also an avid fan of the beach, his garden, and his family. And I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Radcliff. Welcome, Dr. Radcliff.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to be with you all. And yeah, I was reflecting on tonight's topic and really kind of recognizing that there may be lots of people who aren't able to attend because they already need some help for the holidays. And life is definitely hectic around this time of year. So yeah, love that it's recorded and yeah, people can access this as they need it because yeah, this time of year can be stressful and bring up all sorts of different things. So excited to chat with you all about this.
Thank you, Dr. Radcliff. We've worked together for the last couple of years, and you have been really great with your wisdom and tips that you've given us parents. And I know for being a parent of 4 who are under the age of 10, this time of year is definitely a challenge. We have had somebody in our household that has had a cold for pretty much the last 5 weeks, 6 weeks, and as a result, the level of impatience happens with our kids and the adults. The frustration level of our kids. Sometimes the whininess and all those things start to come into that time of year, and obviously it's supposed to be a time of year where everybody's happy and joyful. But when you have a sick child in the household, or you have somebody who's not feeling well, I think tonight's presentation will be really important for us to get in the right mindset and to be able to kind of navigate through the holiday season. And so really excited about your presentation tonight, and I think we should get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And hope everybody feels better soon in your house. And I think this is a really tough time of year because yeah, this year we're seeing unfortunately uptick in a lot of illnesses right now. And so lots of people are having a similar experience, and it's tough to manage that. So managing behavior at this time of year can be challenging. The threats of Santa's naughty and nice list are usually not even enough to kind of manage behavior, and the excitement that comes along with Christmas, let alone when kids are sick or feeling under the weather, that can add some wrinkles. And that's actually one of the questions that came in early, that we'll get to, is talking about kind of navigating some of this on top of kind of like if your kid is sick and how you kind of manage that. But yeah, we'll jump into some of the other stuff first, and kind of talk through a couple different things tonight. And so yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that we think about, routines and schedules, everything gets thrown out of whack. You have all sorts of different gatherings and maybe seeing people that you haven't seen since last Christmas and holidays. Maybe there's overflow stress from school or other spaces. And so that can really show up in a lot of different ways. And we can see this time of year, yeah, be bumpy at times, unfortunately, even though we're trying to make it a joyful time. From, I think for a lot of families, from kind of the Thanksgiving break on through New Year's. So yeah, so new routines, new schedules. We can jump right in with some of that. So things that I think about is there are so many changes, right? So for some kids, they're sleeping in, and parents too. You don't have to get up. There's no alarm that you need to get up for. You may be visiting family. You may have company at your house. I know last year we had people sleeping in almost every room of our house, and we were to the rafters with people, and so that really impacts our 6 and 4 year old, and so that has an impact. I know that our 6 year old's on the swim team, and wow, different sports schedules, and that is changed. Our work schedules are different. Some kids are really bored, right? You're going to hear there's nothing to do. I'm so bored. Right. And so there's all sorts of things, right? Lots of activity, and also like these times where it feels like there's nothing to do sometimes for kids who are used to having their lives much more scheduled, or much more kind of like, hey, I'm going to school, I'm going to aftercare or sports after school, and kind of navigating that. We also know that changes are much more challenging for younger children. So, Michael, you were mentioning, for under 10, that you're in that sweet spot age range where, under 10 crowd changes can be a little bit more difficult. And, understanding like why things are happening differently is not always as easy. Perspective taking is not always as easy. And so it can be really challenging to navigate some of those changes with younger kids. Your teenagers, yeah, they're more likely to go, oh yeah, like it's winter break, and we all get to sleep in a little bit, and maybe I shouldn't bother mom and dad or my parents until 10 o'clock, because I also don't want to be up and before 10 o'clock. And so the landscape changes a little bit with teenagers, but even still, some of these things that we're going to talk through are really helpful for teenagers too, and really help everybody to kind of stay on the same page and make it easier for everyone to have a joyful time this time of year. But yeah, you are in the sweet spot there, Michael, with 4 under 10. Yeah.
Yes, doctor. I think it's been interesting doing a little bit of traveling to see families of ours, that when you see other families traveling, it's a massive, especially for kids, and mommy and daddy, and it's interesting. And if you have any tips, also when you're kind of on the move, we try to stay as close as possible, especially when we're going through a big public area, like an airport or something like that. But it's amazing the patience level of adults when it comes to not the parents, but more or less the passengers and other people. And so if you have some recommendations as well on that, I think all of us would love to hear it.
We can definitely jump into that. Yeah, we want to avoid the home alone situations where you're leaving somebody at check-in or they end up on a plane to New York instead of Miami. So yes, definitely happy to touch on that. And I actually think what we're going to jump into next here, I was thinking about with the title of this next slide, is I actually had in mind like the beginning of Home Alone 1, where they all wake up and right, they're late and the vans for the airport are there and they're all running around the house, chaotic and crazy, and then things get forgotten, right? And then chaos happens, right? And so this is where like, how do we cope with the change? How do we adjust to this? How do we, not that we can prevent power outages that turn off the alarm clocks. Fortunately, I think with cell phones, life's a little bit easier, and we don't have as many of those power outages that affect alarms. But still, how do you kind of navigate some of these changes? How do you maybe prevent some of those home alone moments? And so really, what we say is for parents and really any caregivers involved in your holidays is to prepare. Right. So if you're going somewhere, like having and staying, if you're going to stay, with, the grandparents, and, like, hey, like, let's talk about like what the structure of life is going to be like at your house. I know we have a conversation, with grandparents that we go stay with of like, hey, are we sleeping in? Are you sleeping in? Who's up with the kids in the morning? Are we all up with the kids? And so there's a level of like, caregiver communication that's really important. I know when we've stayed with my brother and his kids, they have very different morning and bedtime routines. And so like, navigating that and how do we make this work and how do we, find a balance that's going to work for everyone's kids. And sometimes you have to let some of the rules or some of the things at your house go and be flexible. And sometimes your kids will really love that and think that's a great treat. Now, you also may know, like, ooh, like, my one kiddo is really good with routines. And so, like, while we want to let some things go, like, we still need to keep some routines consistent. So, your kids best. And you can make those decisions about like what can you drop or what can you keep or what needs to stay the same, versus what can flex. But again, that's preparation, right? Like you may need to sit down and think through like what is happening, like, hey, we're going to the in-laws house on Christmas Eve and it's going to look like this. And then we're waking up at our house on Christmas morning. And then we're going to, the other grandparents' house, for Christmas dinner. And how do we make sure that we're prepared? How do we set the expectations? And so visual schedules can be really helpful, especially for younger kids. Having like a calendar where you can show them, like, hey, this is the day, and maybe they're even helping you draw the pictures, right? So like, hey, we're going to Grammy and Grampy's house on Christmas Eve. And so we're going to have you draw a picture of Grammy and Grampy. And maybe we won't show it to Grammy and Grampy because it won't look like anything like them, but you can help them kind of make that so that it's like, okay, I know that this is what this means, especially if they can't necessarily read and they're, on the younger end. But helping them kind of know, and then talking through that schedule, keeping your kids on as regular a schedule as possible. So even when we have breaks, we still get our kids up within an hour of when they would normally wake up. Now, we've never been so lucky as to have them sleep in an extra hour past they would normally wake up at 6 and 4. That just doesn't happen. But keeping them on a regular schedule and making sure that they're getting consistent regular sleep, even when they're in other places or even when we have other people in our house, and they have to share a room suddenly because they're lucky enough to not have to, like helping find ways to make sure things are as consistent as possible, as well as, again, going back to that second bullet point, setting the expectations. So being really clear with them about like what, hey, you're sharing a room at Grammy and Grampy's house, and like you need to still stay in that room until somebody gets you. Or, we use colored lights at night. So we have like this thing that changes color and it's red all night and then it turns green when they're allowed to get up. And so red, you're in bed, green, you can go. And so we have that change and they need to stay in wherever they are, whatever room they're in, sleeping in, they need to stay there until the light turns color. And so keeping that consistent across spaces, figuring out, if you're traveling, to your point, Michael, like what do we need to bring with us to keep things as consistent as possible? If you're flying, maybe you can't bring all the things. And so we need to figure out what we need to pick up on the other end or bring with us or have somebody else have ready for us, so that we can have that, kind of consistency that's going to help us be successful. But again, those younger kids, especially kind of 5 and under, those regular schedules are really important. You want those kids rested and ready to go. The more tired they are, the easier it is for them to be cranky and grumpy, the easier it is for them to get sick, the easier it is for, lots of things to kind of go wrong. Also, like making sure that they're getting all their meals, right? Meals get thrown off on holidays. And like, I know that my family's planning to have like Christmas dinner at like 3 o'clock. Well, that's when my kids normally eat snack. And they're used to eating a normal lunch. And so like they're probably not, they're probably going to need to still eat a bunch of food at lunchtime, even though, my parents are expecting the adults not to because dinner will be 3 hours later. And so we're going to have to plan and make sure that our kids aren't hangry at like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and make sure that there's, food for them to kind of snack on and be okay. And so again, there's this level of preparation, and yes, it takes extra energy and effort. But what the research shows us when we think about, times where there's changes to schedules and routines, it's this kind of classic, like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That like the energy you put into preparation is going to really benefit you. Other important things to think about is stuff may still go wrong. That's okay, right? Preparing yourself to be flexible, building in downtime so that you can be flexible. We have a neurodivergent kiddo in our house. We need to be able to be flexible. We need to be able to adapt, because sometimes like they're going to have an off day when we are not expecting it or not hoping for it, and we need to be able to flex with that. And so building in downtime and helping people understand that like, hey, sometimes we have to flex around our kiddo so that we can all have the best time together, and so that this can be really a joyful time. And they, and hey, this kiddo may need some extra downtime. Again, I note here, especially important for all you introverts, folks that have shy kids, kids that are anxious, and we're going to talk about anxiety a little bit more soon. But again, build that downtime in, when you're thinking about kind of the schedule, the routine, and life can be hectic and fast paced, and kids, as much as they love to be active and do lots of things, they also need time to slow down, and enjoy things and just have fun, right? Enjoy, if they're opening presents or whatever, enjoy their presents for a while, have fun with it, spend time together. Holidays, if you're able to have time off with your kids, it's a great time to like build, those relationships. And I'm going to touch on that again a little bit later, as well. But again, this is not a perfect system, but the more you can kind of prepare, set clear expectations for each other as adults as well as for your kids, in kind of an age appropriate way. Trying to, have some level of schedule or routine that you can show your kids or explain to your kids. We've already started talking through with our kids of like when, certain things are happening, and showing them on a calendar, so that they kind of have a sense and know, a little bit of what to, kind of expect and prepare for, and what that stuff means. So again, not perfect, but a lot of these things we see, go really well, when we can prepare. So you're doing all this preparation. Now it's time for the gatherings, right? That's a lot of what happens at holidays, right? And you got Aunt Gertrude who comes in and she's like, give Aunt Gertrude a big hug. And your anxious child runs away. Or as my children did when they met their great uncle at Thanksgiving, they yelled stranger danger and ran away. And admittedly they had never met their great uncle before, but like, right, like he came in, wanted the big hug from kids that he didn't really know and they didn't really know him. And so one of them had just learned about stranger danger at school like 3 days before, and so we got that delightful reaction. Now of course, great uncle's siblings and everybody else thought it was hilarious, but I think reflects and kind of shows kids can be anxious about things. They're meeting new people, right? And like even for adults, these settings can be stressful, right? Like you may have a family member that you don't get along with, or you may have somebody that like, just kind of gets under your skin. And so there can be anxiety before some of these gatherings for lots of people, but especially again for kids, and sometimes kids don't really kind of know what to expect, or they haven't been to many holiday parties, or like for them, a 7-year-old hearing like, I knew you when you were a baby, admittedly, like, and actually I had a patient tell me this this week, like, that doesn't mean a whole lot to me because I don't remember being a baby, and I didn't know that person, and nobody told me who they were, and they didn't introduce themselves, so I had no idea why this person wanted to hug me and squeeze me. And so, right, again, an ounce of preparation can be a pound of cure, but like their parents didn't really prepare them for that get together. This child was really stressed, and that was a really kind of anxiety provoking experience for them. And so again, thinking about how we prepare our kids for these, helping them to know what to expect, and again setting expectations for interactions, like how do you want to greet other people, right? They don't have to hug everyone. Right, like that. In fact, actually, one of the things that we talk about when we think about like body safety and helping kids set limits and know boundaries is that, like, if we tell kids that they have to hug somebody even when they don't want to, that's actually sending a message that people can violate, like them saying no, in a like, again, a hug is kind of an intimate expression, right? If you're telling them that they have to accept a hug from somebody that they don't want to hug from or they don't know, you're teaching them a message that is actually kind of sending the wrong signals of like, well, you have to let somebody touch you when you didn't want to be touched. And again, not trying to stray too much into thinking about things like sexual abuse, but again, these are the things that actually we've seen be connected and be related, to kind of blurring the lines for kids around like what is okay touching and what is not. And so if kids don't want to be hugged, you need to respect that. And so if a kid says no to a hug from you, you got to let them you know get on with that, and that's fine. And so give them a high five, right, or a handshake, right? That's okay. Or they don't have to have any contact. Also, like kids sometimes don't like to be touched, right? Again, I have a neurodivergent kiddo that's sensory sensitive, doesn't like to be touched sometimes. So a hug would be really disruptive for them. And so for somebody to not respect that as well would be really upsetting for them, and could actually derail like a lot of things. And so again, this is kind of like a warning that I give a lot of parents and a lot of families around this time, is that it's okay to say no to Aunt Gertrude's big hug. And it's okay to set those expectations. But it's also important as parents to then communicate to the other people that, hey, like, little Johnny here is a high fiver, not a hugger, right? You can advocate for your kids in those situations. Or like, why don't you give him the pound, and like, you can explode it and make it rain. Right. And like, you can do other fun things and other ways for them to like say hi and greet somebody without it having to be the hug that maybe is uncomfortable. And so again, setting those expectations with your kids, as well as potentially in advance with some of the adults, or even in the moment kind of advocating, talking to them about what to talk about, right? Like, hey, like, maybe you don't want them talking about their stomach bug that they had 2 weeks ago and how gross that was. Maybe you want them to help, like, hey, tell everybody about like the soccer trophy that you won, or tell everybody about the cool experience, right? So giving kids topics to talk about and helping them to have ideas of like conversation starters or things to share can really help in a lot of good ways, because one, it can help avoid some of those embarrassing things that maybe you don't want them talking about, but also it can help them feel more successful in those conversations. They can talk about something that they're interested in, enthusiastic about, and feel good about. And a lot of times that can be really like great stuff to talk about at kind of a social gathering. Again, don't force those interactions, especially for your anxious kiddos. It's okay for them to be anxious. And people say, but it's family. And again, the reminder is like, they may not know that family as well as you do, or it may not be as comfortable for them as it is for you. And so create a backup plan if they're overwhelmed, right? Like, hey, if the gathering's at your house, like, where's the quiet space that they can go to with some calming activities? Are there signals that you all can use that are maybe nonverbal? Or maybe it's like, just a poke on the side or something like that, that they poke you and let you know. Or maybe they tell you verbally. But you can kind of come up with ways to make sure that you're thinking about their needs as well as yours. And maybe you need the quiet space too, right? Maybe you need to step away at your in-laws, or you need that space. And so thinking ahead, communicating with the hosts as well, of like, hey, again, our sensory sensitive child in a gathering where there's a lot of people, that is going to overwhelm them. And so either they're going to have headphones, or they're going to need to, like, we're going to need to find a space so that they can have some, time to exhale or time to relax, or whatever they might need. And so, like, we're going to connect with the people that we're going to hang out with around that. And if, the host says we can't accommodate that, then okay, like, then you need to figure out if that's an important gathering to go to, or an important gathering for your child to go to, and figure some of that out too. And so again, preparation, communication goes a long way. Also, reward systems are really effective. And reward systems can be for brave behaviors as well as other desired behaviors. And so, hey, like, you don't have to talk to everyone, but we do want you to say hi. And like, if you do a good job of saying hi, then you can have 2 cookies from the cookie tray. Or, like, hey, if you play nice with your cousins that maybe you don't get along with, like, and you are willing to share with them, and let them play with your toys while they're at our house, like, then we can, we've got a special prize for you. Make sure you have the special prize and follow through on that, because if you don't, the child will remember that for forever, and never let you forget it. Speaking from personal and professional experience. But again, so make sure you're able to follow through on those rewards, but reward systems really go a long way, in making sure you're kind of helping support those desired behaviors, helping kids be brave. Right? They don't want to be afraid. They don't want to be anxious. We don't want to be afraid or anxious. And so how do we, encourage and support that? And so again, set those expectations for those gatherings, help them kind of, know what to expect, and how to, act, give them examples, right? You can practice this even. Right. So I've been doing some practices with patients over the past few weeks of like, hey, you're gonna have to meet a bunch of people at this holiday party. Like, what do you say when you meet a new person? Or like, what do you say when you meet a family member who, like, apparently remembers you and you have no idea who they are? And sometimes us adults need those tips too. And great tips are, of course, always introducing them to someone else, so that then you can get their name. But also you can just ask their name, and that's okay too. And teaching your kids that it's okay to ask a name or ask somebody about themselves, or things like that, are great skills to teach them. And so again, you can practice that with them. You can practice and pretend, have people role play silly, have them role play as the silly cousin, have them role play as the grumpy uncle, have them role play as, whoever, and practice, meeting and saying hi, and like telling them about your soccer trophy or whatever. That can give kids a lot of confidence going into those situations, again, especially for those anxious kiddos. Yeah. So this is one that we have experienced a lot in our household. I want another cookie, or come on, can I please just have one more cookie? Right, or some version of that. Right, I just want another treat. It'll just be one. Right, like at gatherings, or even if it's not a gathering, but like you've got the cookie tray or some other sweets or treats around. Right, you get some of those demands, and then if they don't get their way because, hey, they've been getting a lot of special treats or attention, likely, you may get the tantrums, right? And so we see at this time of year that kids are more likely to tantrum, actually. So we see that some kids are kind of more prone, whether, and there's not really like causation here. So whether it's because they're tired because of changed routines, or whether it's because they're hungry, or whether it's just because, hey, sometimes like kids are getting lots of attention and they aren't used to getting a no during this time of the year sometimes, and so getting that no is like, what? And just a surprise. And so sometimes we see hyperactive or other disruptive behaviors come out. Sometimes this is caused by anxiety. And so that's an important thing to pay attention to, is that for some kids, especially under the age of 10, we can see some of those disruptive behaviors because, hey, I'm stressed by the situation. And if I act out, maybe you'll take me home. Or maybe I'll get out of this situation somehow. But thinking about like, how are we going to be proactive if you know that, like, hey, I have a kiddo that's prone to tantrums, or I know that my kiddo is definitely going to be asking for that extra cookie. Again, setting those expectations of like, hey, when we get to Aunt Judy's tonight, you are able to have two treats, so pick them wisely, and after you have two, like, there's no more. And so setting that expectation from the start can go a long way, so that they're not thinking I should be able to get more, or I should have more, or whatever that might be. Think about rewards for that, right? Like, hey, we can reward good behavior. We can reward, hey, if you instead of I want another cookie, like, man, please have another cookie. And if you're asking nicely, hey, it's the holidays, maybe we're going to give them that other cookie. Right, and so saying like, hey, if you're using nice words, we may, we can do that. Right, and so sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes it's more specific rewards of like, every 15 minutes that you are doing a good job playing nicely with your cousins, you're going to earn a ticket. You're going to be able to cash those tickets in for, some prize, at the end of the night, or extra treats at the end of the night. Each ticket can turn into an extra treat. I don't know. Depends on how late you want to be up with them. Think about timeout, right? If you use timeout at home, can you use timeout where you're going? Is that an appropriate response? Is that an okay thing to do? Generally what we think of kind of from the behavioral literature and research is that yes, you could do timeout anywhere, you just need to be prepared to do it. Having said that, the reality is that may not always be something that's okay, right? Like, you may have grandparents that are like, no, no one has ever put in time out in my house and you will not do that, right? And so, again, thinking about like, how are we going to manage behavior when we get there, and what are we going to do kind of proactively to support this? And so you may need to shift to like, we're going to go more heavy on the rewards, or and really try to focus on reinforcing that good behavior to try and avoid every possible chance that we will have to deal with a timeout or some of that really disruptive negative behavior. Also, like, what can you ignore, right? Like, hey, can like are the kids able to play all together in the basement, and like if they're yelling and screaming, we can all ignore the loud hyperactive behaviors and some of those disruptive behaviors. And yes, somebody might get smacked with a pillow, but hopefully like no major injuries, and like hopefully everybody's kind of doing okay, and we can ignore a lot of the small stuff, and kind of manage it in that way. Or like, what can we ignore just even upstairs? Like, okay, like we're gonna let our kiddo navigate the buffet line themselves, and they can get what they want, and we're not going to police that, and we're going to let them have at it, and we'll kind of deal with the outcomes later. And so again, it's thinking about like your own self and your own well-being, and what can I tolerate and manage, and what do I have the energy to manage, And so, for us, we go heavy on the rewards. I carry tickets with me everywhere. If you've seen me do talks before, I think I still got, we haven't made it to this wheel of tickets yet, mainly because our kids keep cashing the other ones in and then we reuse them. But like we have wheels of tickets around our house. We take them with us, right? And so I will give out tickets for every like 5 minutes of good behavior if I need to. And then we're really clear about like what does good behavior mean? And it's different for a 4-year-old than it is for a 6-year-old. It's different for a 6-year-old than it is for a 10-year-old. And so each child may have different expectations of like what is good behavior, and also they may have different things that are hard for them. So like our 4-year-old is like full on, like talking back, kind of bossy 4-year-old mode. And so like the things for our 4-year-old that we need to kind of reinforce are a little different than our 6-year-old. And so you may have different expectations for each one, but you can still be rewarding frequently. And then they can cash those tickets in. And so we were, at an event and like, we knew that there was the potential for like treats and different things like that. And so they had to kind of earn tickets during the day as we were getting ready. And then as we went to it, they could earn tickets as we were kind of there and then, cash those tickets in for treats, and, different, kind of prizes and different things that were there. And so that worked really well. We had like one minor like foot stomping moment that was ignorable, right? And so we chose to ignore it. And like, I'm not going to take away tickets. I'm not going to like punish my kiddo who is doing an excellent job in a stressful situation for them for stamping their foot and kind of being like, no, I want to do this. Like, okay, we can roll with that. And so again, we also were very ready for that, right? Again, comes back to that preparation. We had our tickets. We ourselves made sure we were in good mental spaces for that event, and what we were going to, which is not always easy to do. And so, again, that's also like if you're going with a partner to an event, right? Hey, communicating with your spouse, like, hey, maybe you're going to the in-laws and like that's really stressful for you. And so, hey, I'm going to need you to be able to support the kids a little bit more because I may be a little bit more short with them because I'm going to be feeling stressed too. Right. And so that proactive communication between caregivers is so helpful and so important. And it also sets the tone then for your kids. And so it allows you to kind of navigate some of that. Single parenting can be a little bit different, and thinking about kind of what your needs are, how you're navigating that, how you're, seeking out support when you're going to gatherings. Maybe you're communicating that like, hey, I need a break. And like, I'm telling my kids they're coming to like Uncle Ben for all the needs. And like, they're coming to you, Uncle Ben. And I'm taking I'm just sending them to you. And like, you deal with it and I need the space. And that's okay to do too. And so again, thinking about what your needs are, how you can kind of navigate some of this successfully too, because again, we want everyone to have a joyful holiday. And so, again, there's ups and downs, and we may want to throw our own tantrums sometimes too. But maybe you need a reward for yourself at times.
Doctor, we had a question from a parent
Yeah.
regarding the tickets, and what a great idea, by the way. And when do you do the tickets at the end, the transaction call? Do you do that at the very end of the night after you've gone to your function or when you're out, or the parent has said, or do you immediately give that to them when you see them do something right?
Yeah. Great question. So there's two ways that we do this. There's one that's kind of like standard immediate reinforcement. So giving them right away. So especially when we do with one of our kiddos who actually like wears a watch, the 6-year-old wears a watch and tells time. And so like we will, like say, okay, every 10 minutes, like that you're doing a good job, like you can earn a ticket. And this kiddo has really bought into the ticket system. It's worked really well. They're super motivated by Pokemon cards and Lego. And so they have different values for Pokemon cards and Lego and things like that. And so sometimes they're saving up for a bigger Lego set. Sometimes they just want a bunch of Pokemon cards and they're trading in a bunch of tickets right away. But they'll keep track of for us even. But like what I do is I set an alarm in my pocket. And so I have my phone on vibrate. It will go off every 10 minutes and I will give them tickets. And so I have the tickets in my pocket and I'm going to go find them and say like, wow, like you've been doing a great job playing, with your cousins. Such a great job that like I couldn't even hear you all, or like I didn't, I wasn't even thinking about you for 10 minutes while I was chatting with the adults, and like, wow, what a great job you're doing. Here's a ticket. And so like you can, really do that, again, kind of immediate on the spot reinforcement, and then they can cash them in, at kind of preset times. Usually you want to kind of set those times of like, hey, you can cash them in at dessert, right? So like when dessert comes out, like you can cash all your tickets in for as many, like however many tickets you have, turns into, depending on how many you're giving out, you may want to, maybe it's 5 to 1 dessert, or maybe it's 1 to 1 dessert, depending. Think about that ratio again, how much you want to stay up, depending on how much sugar they have. Or maybe you're setting it for the end of the night that like they're working towards some other bigger prize, or some other type of thing, and so maybe it's not that they're earning a specific prize that night, or like, hey, maybe they get to keep the tickets for this other prize they're working on, but if they've earned 5, that earns them like this bonus cookie at the end of the night or something like that. So you can be pretty flexible about some of that, but again, it's important to set the expectation beforehand and then have the like follow through, and the follow through is really important. And again, we totally dropped the ball over the summer with our kiddos, and like the older one has still reminded us that we forgot about the prize the one time. We're like 6 months out from when we forgot, and they still remember that we forgot. So again, making sure you follow through. The other option for tickets is contingency reward. So basically, you're kind of giving them the tickets in advance and saying, here, you get 10 tickets for the night. Every time I have to talk to you about your behavior, you have to give me a ticket. And so kids are really motivated to keep their tickets. This works really well with overnight when you're sleeping somewhere else, to have a system where like anytime they come out and get somebody, or like come and get you or something like that, especially if, and this is more maybe for your elementary school age kids who like can sleep through the night, are capable of kind of putting themselves back to sleep if they wake up. But like kind of setting it up that like, hey, every time you come and get me, you owe me a ticket. And so kids will, I mean, it was how we got our youngest to sleep through the night, is that they wanted those tickets so bad because their older sibling got tickets. And so like we would hear them wake up, but then like they figured out how to go back to sleep because they wanted to keep those tickets, and they didn't, or they would call for us and we'd say, do you want to trade in a ticket? And it was like, nope, oh, nope, no, 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 nope. And they would stay, in there. And so, the challenge with some of this is you need the buy-in for the tickets. And so what I would recommend with ticket systems is do a practice trial before wherever you go. So like do, hey, like you're going on Christmas Eve, so that's Sunday somewhere, and you want to make sure you've got good behavior. On Saturday, do a practice trial. And when you do the practice trial, high payout, right, for low amount of tickets. Get the buy-in, right? So like every ticket turns into a cookie, or like every ticket turns into like 2 Pokemon cards is what we did for our oldest, and like that was like gold. And we did a weekend of like every ticket turned into 2 Pokemon cards, and he ended up with like 100 Pokemon cards at the end of the weekend, and was like, this is amazing, I can't wait to show my friends, and everybody was so excited. And like then he was bought into the tickets from there. And we've of course changed the ratio, and now he has to trade in 5 tickets for 3 cards. And so we've adjusted that on him, but it's still, the buy-in is still there. And so having kind of that practice where you're like setting kind of low expectations that are achievable, kind of easy to manage goals and things, and having kind of like, again, that high payout of like the thing that they're going to be really interested in, and talk to them about what the rewards are that they would want. So I know at like both grandparents' houses for our kids, like they love the cookies that both grandmas make. And so like they are 100% bought in for bonus cookies from the tickets. And so like that's a really easy one for us to like set that goal with them, or set that reward with them. So yeah. That definitely happy to, I can always talk more about reward systems and stuff like that too. But yeah, no, good questions, and happy to chat more about some of that. Oh yeah, sorry, Michael, did you have?
No, no, thank you. That's fantastic. It was a couple questions that were coming up regarding for rewarding for good behavior. So I'll hold the other two that we've got to the very end.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, and so the last thing I'll kind of touch on is just talking about like the school thing, right? So like, and this may be more for your older kids, and your teens than your younger kiddos, right? But like, I don't want to do my homework, right? Like this is break, and schools continue to assign homework, even though the research shows time and time again, that especially over breaks, homework is actually not super effective, and doesn't actually prevent any like retention loss, and usually just actually creates more stress for kids than it does actually any benefit. And so my advice always is like, parents, talk to your schools about the homework, and the research behind the effectiveness of homework, because it does not support it. But we see that it bleeds into breaks, right? And we see that it takes over. I've already talked to kids this week who are like, I have a project due on January 3rd and I'm going to have to work all break on it. And so that can be stressful. We also know that like bullying and things like that, right, that may have been going on and you may not know about, sometimes breaks are when kids talk about it. They've gotten a break from school, and then like maybe as you're getting to that last weekend, right? You're at New Year's weekend and kids are getting ready to go back to school. And it's like they break down. I don't want to go to school. I can't go back to school. They're so mean to me there. And so it's not uncommon for psychologists to get calls early January. Sometimes we get them after the Thanksgiving break. Sometimes we get them after spring break. But after the breaks, we get calls about school refusal, and returning from breaks. And usually, I'm not going to say always, but there are many, many times that the school refusal is often related to bullying, or it's related to like the stress of the schoolwork, and a child who maybe is struggling with the schoolwork or feeling overwhelmed or behind, or feeling that pressure. Those are the two main reasons that we'll see school refusal. And school refusal is highest after the, as far as breaks go, it's highest after the winter break. The days are shorter. It's just like, right, like you're kind of on that like downslope from the holiday energy, and so school refusal can happen. And so again, this is where sometimes having some of those routines stay consistent, so that they're not having slept in till 10 o'clock all break, and then all of a sudden you have to get them up at 6 o'clock in the morning, right? So having some of those routines, doing some of that, can set them up for success. Having some of that preparation of like letting them know that like when you're talking about the holidays, like include when they go back to school in that like breakdown of like, here's the holiday breaks, and then yes, you do go back to school on January 2nd or 3rd or whatever it might be. But this can be a really good time to check in with your kids too about how things are, right? This is a great time if you have the time, and if you're so fortunate to be off when your kids are off, like do one-on-one like breakfast dates, or do a little bit of like, hey, we're going to do one-on-one coffee date or something like that. Spend some one-on-one time. Talk to them about social life and friends. Talk to them about things that they feel pressure about or worries about. Talk to them about like non-academic aspects of school, right? Like whether it's sports or band and other activities that they're involved in or clubs. This is a time when we hear parents talking about like, wow, my kid talked about bullying, or they talked about like, feeling really stressed, by certain, social pressures, or friends are changing, or things like that. This is a time when you can get a chance, to have that dialogue. And this part, again, the homework part is something that we see more for older kids. Talking to your kids about all of this, we do this and did this when our oldest was in kindergarten, and continue to do this, right? They're never too young to talk about some of this. And our kiddo was able to talk about like, yeah, what came up was like, hey, I really don't feel like I can pay attention like the other kids, and I feel like I get in trouble a lot, and I don't want to go back to school in January. And then we were able to, kind of get through, some evaluation processes, and, get some other supports in, and work with the school, and being able to slow down and take that time to have those conversations was really helpful, and has set them up for success for the end of last year as well as then the start of this school year. And so we're already ready, and we're already preparing for the like potential that they're not going to want to go back in January this year, and have been working with teachers around that adjustment back in. And so again, thinking about like that preparation of like, okay, this may be a bumpy transition back in. Do we need a reward system for that first week? And like, hey, it's a short week, so like you just need to make it through 3 days, and then like we're gonna go to the movies if you have like, if you can earn 15 out of the 20 possible tickets for that week, like you can go to the movies on the weekend and we'll take you. Right, so like doing those things to reinforce things like morning routines and getting up and getting going, doing those things to reinforce like doing your homework when you get home from school that week, and those types of things is really helpful. And so again, it's a good winter break is a good time to check in with your kids and get a pulse on how they're doing, get a sense of what's going on for them. And we know that the sooner you start those conversations, the easier it is to have throughout their life. And it's easier to have those conversations than with your teenager if you've been having them all along and you've been checking in with them about stuff. Yeah, a teenager's not going to tell you everything. We would hope that they don't. That's actually kind of the sign of healthy independent development, if they keep a couple secrets from their parents. But they're going to still tell you a lot, and they're going to tell you if things are really bad or things are really hard, if you continue to kind of create that space over the years. And so start young, create those spaces for dialogue. We take our 4-year-old out to breakfast dates like once a month, and take turns between parents, and yeah, we don't talk really about too much deep stuff, but we still create that space for them to talk about friends or talk about other things. Our 4-year-old is also the social butterfly and has no worries and is super extroverted, so different beast than our older one. But that's kind of yeah, a lot of what I had planned to cover tonight. But also, yeah, we've already touched on some other things, and I think one of the things that I'm thinking about as we were talking, Michael, going back to your first question about travel, is reward systems, is setting up expectations for travel of like, hey, we are all going, like we're all going to stay together, or this is the check-in spot, right? Even, and like it's never a bad thing to like help them know who do they need to find if they get lost. My spouse took our oldest before kindergarten to Washington, D.C. on the train to go visit the National Zoo. And they were on the metro, and like we literally like put, safety pinned inside of their pants like emergency contact info, and like taught them how to use that and who to go ask for help. Right, like it's okay to do that when you're traveling. Like that's not right when we like talk to safety experts and things like that, like that's actually an okay thing to do, is to like prepare for that. Now, again, like as kids get older, they've got cell phones, they've got other ways of getting in contact with you. There's other options, but also setting up expectations to avoid that of like, hey, like, we're gonna make sure that like we're looking for you every so often. You need to make sure you look for us every so often. Or when we go through this part of the airport, you need to hold hands. And if you do, like you'll get a ticket on the other side. Or we'll do this thing on the other side. And so again, setting those expectations, kind of recognizing when are those moments where you're going to need the best behavior, right? TSA check and stuff like that, versus and boarding the plane, having those different things ready for the plane or the train. There's an awesome book called The ADHD Big Book of Lists that has all sorts of advice for traveling with kids who are kind of maybe going to have ADHD or other disruptive behaviors. There's whole lists in there of like, how do you survive a car trip with a child with ADHD? Right? What activities do you need? You need to have lots of small activities because they may be popping between them every 5 or 10 minutes. You need to set up the expectation of like, hey, we may have quiet time, or headphones are a wonderful thing. It's okay to use screens. Kids are not going to like suddenly have their brain melt and rot away if you let them watch 2 movies on a 6-hour trip. That's okay. They're going to survive. You're going to survive. And hey, that may be the special treat, is like, this is the only time you ever get to watch 2 movies in a day, is when like we travel to Grammy and Grampy's house. And like, that's part of what makes it so special, is you get to watch 2 movies a day in the car that day. And so again, set up those expectations, try to create fun, try to also, again, prepare yourself, right? So we traveled and drove over 10 hours over Thanksgiving with our kids and our dog in a Subaru Outback, which is not a particularly large car to have 2 kids and a dog in. And like we set up the expectations, the rewards, but also like my spouse and I, like we packed all the treats we wanted. We had all the drinks we wanted. We had like the music, and like we made sure that our like Sirius XM, subscription was paid so that we could like we made sure that we had what we needed to be successful as well. And I think that's the other part of traveling with kids, especially, your under 10 crowd, is like you need to make sure you're set up for success. And then of course, always bring extra chargers and batteries and all of that stuff too. You can never have too many chargers packed. But yeah, there's other questions, and I know I took up a lot of time on that one, but yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. We have three really great questions. The first question comes from a family who has two. Their oldest child is mildly on the spectrum and wanted to try out for the school play, the school holiday play. He never has really enjoyed crowds in the past, has had a few meltdowns over the last couple years. And their child actually, they risked it and let him do it. He did it, and he absolutely blew the parents away, and they're still scratching their heads. And the achievement caught them by complete surprise. And now they're trying to. Their question to you is, now what do we do? Because what they're trying to do is help him be successful, but at the same time, this was a big step for them, where they didn't know if he was going to have a meltdown or not, but he ended up doing fantastic. So any recommendations for this family in terms of kind of letting it's the fear of failure, it sounds like, of that the parents have, but at the same time they don't want this to ever blow up for their child.
Yeah. And I'm like thinking back to like camp as well, right? And first time campers. And there's that like nervousness of like, parents kind of letting your kid go, and trusting, that things will go well and they'll be successful. And, right, like a lot of times it turns out okay. And I love hearing, these stories. And one of the things I think about is harnessing those interests. And so if that's something that their child, was successful at, enjoyed, is, hey, like, do you want to check out, our community theater, group, and like, are they doing a spring play? And
Hmm.
would you want to try to be in one of the, like crowd scenes or something like that? Would you want to try the school spring play if they have one? Finding some of those other opportunities that may map onto that, and kind of encouraging that, is fantastic. And yes, there may be tough moments. I think the cool thing about theater, and I've actually had a number of autistic patients really like and do well with theater, is that the crowd is quiet until the end, or like except for like maybe big moments. And so while there's a lot of people, you're not having some of that sensory stimulation in the same way. And so some kids do really well with it because they're just interacting with the people on stage. And as somebody who did acting through high school and dabbled, a few other times, and those of you that have done it, when you're on stage, you're not always seeing the other people. You're in the zone with the play. You're not necessarily thinking about the audience a ton, if you're in the zone. And so, it sounds like their kid was able to be in the zone with the play. It sounds like it was, really well supported by, the school and everyone. And I think, credit to everyone who was involved in that for supporting and helping their kid be successful. That's awesome. And yeah, again, I think, the more that you can sometimes harness and support some of that, and sometimes it is thinking about like what sensory, stimuli wasn't there that maybe bothers them at other times, what, things were there that reinforced it or made it easier. And depending on how old their kiddo is, sometimes you can ask and say like, hey, like what made that easy? Or, you can ask them some of that, as you're being proud parents and just being blown away by the achievement. But that's awesome, and fantastic, yeah, joyful holiday story. I love it.
Doctor, do you think it's okay to have a discussion though with that child about, hey, you did this, there was a lot of people in the audience. Like, is it okay to talk about that when they've been afraid of crowds before, or just let them be in the zone and that do you poke the bear in that case by bringing that up when you said talk about it?
Yeah, I think it's okay, especially after the fact. Before the fact, you may be creating some anxiety, or like, there's going to be a lot of people there, right? And that can create or feed some of the anxiety. And so, the way we want the kind of proactive or beforehand support is much more of like, hey, like you've done such a great job memorizing your lines, right, all of that kind of reinforcement. After the fact, it's okay to kind of ask them. And again, especially kind of depending on age, when we're thinking about some of that, of like, hey, like, that was a really, could have been a scary thing for you, or, that, is something that scares lots of people. What made you feel like you could, do it? Or like, what helped you be successful? Help us, like, or even if like, hey, if you're the parent, you're like, I would have never done that. Like you can say that I would have never done that. Like, wow, like I'm really impressed. What helped you do that? And like, give me some tips in case I ever want to do it. Right. And like that can help give you a window into like, what helped them be successful, what helped them feel comfortable, while you're praising them. And then also, again, you're kind of being curious and non-judgmental, about that experience. But yeah, especially after the fact, it's unlikely that you're going to introduce any new anxiety or new fear, or chase them away from it, by kind of asking them about it and being curious about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Good question.
great, thank you. We have two other quick ones.
Yeah.
We'll
I'll try to be brief in my response. Yeah.
end with a nice, a really great one for the holidays. But this next question is, this family has a daughter who is quite the athlete. At sporting events, she is not savoring the moment when she scores. She gets a ton of praise from others, but she at times just kind of goes with the flow. how do we keep our daughter in the mindset of staying humble versus just like it's not it's I'm they haven't really explained whether she's overconfident or she's too humble, but it's almost like how does she accept praise more? I believe the parents are asking
And
in the right way.
yeah, and some kids get embarrassed by praise, and so like just don't respond. Some kids are right being a little arrogant and are like, "Yeah, I got this," like, and just kind of, "Yep, shower me." And some kids, are really humble, right? And so might be like, like, oh, like, right, like that's how it's coming out is like, oh, it's no big deal. Like I'm just playing the game, and that's how I do it. And so I think there's a little bit of like trying to figure out like how is your star athlete kind of responding in those situations. I think great exercises for kids of any age and really even for adults is like talking through like, hey, like let's talk about right, like something good that happened today, something that was challenging today, right? And so you can do that for a sport game too, or right, like wow, sport game, I sound like I know nothing about sports. You can do that for right any activity. And so like, hey, tell me like three things that like you felt like you did well, right? So like not your team, right? Or maybe it's like two things you did well, one thing your team did well, and then like one thing maybe you feel like you want to work on. Right. And so sometimes that's helping kids to kind of see both sides of things, keep that balanced perspective. Right. We know that like the overly optimistic people sometimes don't see the reality of situations. We know the overly pessimistic people sometimes miss out on the joy of certain situations. And so finding that balance is really important. And so this can be a way to kind of help kids find that balance of like, let's talk through that a little bit. Teens don't always want to do that. But like, hey, you can tell them that they get their cell phone for the next week if they do this with you after every game, and use the cell phone as bait or whatever you need to. But yeah, again, I think helping them talk through of like what went really well or like what were you proud of, what things did you really feel like worked well for you. But again, some kids are really shy or embarrassed about the praise. Some kids are you Some parents have done a great job of like teaching their kids to be humble, and then when kids turn out to be these star athletes or these amazing singers or musicians, and then they're actually really humble, they don't know what to do, and they're just kind of like, yeah, okay, and so they don't, you don't see them like being crazy overjoyed or like doing crazy celebrations. And so it can vary, and it may not be that they're not enjoying it or they're not like appreciating it. It just may be their own way of celebrating it. But yeah, definitely okay to kind of talk through some of that, ask about some of that, encourage them in some of that, encourage them to brag about it at the holidays. Like to be honest, this is like grandparents want to hear their grandkids brag. Like this is a great time to encourage your kids to talk about their achievements, because almost every grandparent wants to hear how awesome their grandkids are, because then they want to tell all their friends. And like that's just the reality of like how this goes. And so we all know it. So it's okay to like, hey, like talk about the things you're proud of. Let's talk about what we're proud of you for. These are things you could talk to grandma about, and that type of stuff too. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. So we have our last question.
Yeah.
I think this is perfect to wrap up tonight, and that is this is a new family with a 3-year-old who is asking you, could you recommend any great old movies for the holidays that where we could start a holiday tradition and a routine with?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, so we are addicted to all the holiday movies. So I will confess that we watch almost every single possible one we can get our hands on, even some of the really bad ones. I think that actually can just in and of itself just be a fun tradition of like, hey, we're gonna put all the like holiday movies away every year at New Year's, and they don't come out again until like Thanksgiving break. and kind of do that. We have some that like we do with our Christmas tree when we decorate our Christmas tree. Um, we for I don't know why this is the one we do, but we watch the old school Grinch, the original Grinch. Like with like Thurl Ravenscroft or whatever narrating, and that one. Not the John or Jim Carrey one, and I have not watched the new one, admittedly. That's I try to watch all the Christmas movies. I haven't made it to that one yet, but so sometimes like tying it to a specific thing you do can be a really great thing. Sometimes changing it up. So like we've done like jammies that match things. So our oldest was obsessed with Snowman for a while. We watched a lot of Frosty for a couple of years. And so like we did Christmas jammies that were like Frosty jammies that like went with the movie. And so you can really kind of pick any one of those. I think be prepared to navigate like not perfect examples of like interpersonal skills that like we would want people to have today. So like there's some bullying that happens in Rudolph and they kind of overlook it. So like you may need to like be prepared to talk to your kids about that. This year when we watched Rudolph, the older one, our 6-year-old, went like, they're like bullying him, that's not okay, and like called it out as we were watching, and we're like, yeah, like, we had a conversation about that. So be ready for some of that with some of those older ones. But I mean, we really love a lot of those old. I think Rudolph, Frosty, the Grinch are like three of our kids' favorites. The other great part about all of them is they're less than 40 minutes, and so you can squeeze them in a lot of spaces and in a lot of times, and like build in different things around it. Our kids now, that anytime they drink hot chocolate, they want to watch Frosty, is like their jam for whatever reason, and they actually have, I know why, because they have Frosty the Snowman mugs and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think you can make it how you want to make it, and pick the movie or the like tradition that you feel like you can tolerate for the next 15 plus years, as well as like maybe it's something that is easy to keep fresh or easy to kind of tweak or adjust, especially as kids get older and do different things. I think it'll be pretty easy for us to always do a movie while do the Grinch while we decorate our tree with the kids, and like I think that's going to be a pretty easy one for us to do. But yeah, there's certainly lots of great ones out there, and certainly as they get older, there's a lot of fun ones, that you can do with them for sure too.
Well, what a great question to end
Yeah,
with.
yeah, fun one. Yes, appreciate that a lot.
Well, Doctor, thank you so much for your time. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. For additional resources, feel free to go on to Nemours' website at www.nemours.org. And Nemours has put together an incredible kind of website where you can get a lot of questions answered, which is kidshealth.org. And obviously, you're more than welcome to come on our website at esfcamps.com. We will be recording this webinar tonight, and you'll be able to always access it on our website. And should you have any questions about ESF, feel free to reach out to us at info@esfcamps.com. I want to thank Nemours. I want to thank you, Doctor, for your support over the course of the past year. It's been wonderful working with you. And all the great people at Nemours. You all are incredible, and what you do for youth and families is amazing. Being a customer of yours, we have been truly impressed by our family, and we sing your praises. So again, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Doctor. And we wish everyone happy holidays and all the best. And may 2024 be amazing for you and your family.
Yeah, my pleasure. And yeah, happy holidays to everyone. Happy New Year. And yeah, always a pleasure.
Thanks again. Take care, everybody. Have a great night.